Welcome to our channel.
Chapter 1. An Invitation to Die. For it was a misty Friday morning when Jessica Fletcher arrived at Ivy Hill Retreat, a grand Victorian estate nestled among the turning trees of the Berkshire Mountains. The invitation had come from Celeste Merriweather, a once-renowned poet who had disappeared from the public eye 2 decades earlier. Ivy Hill was her private sanctuary, recently reopened as a writing retreat for select guests. Jessica, flattered and curious, accepted without hesitation. A narrow gravel driveway snaked through tall maples and led to the estate's wrought-iron gates. The house itself loomed with ivy-covered stone walls, Gothic windows, and tall chimneys spilling ribbons of smoke into the grey sky. A storm was forecasted for the weekend, but Jessica found the setting, moody and secluded, perfect for creativity. "Miss Fletcher," called a young woman from the portico. "Welcome to Ivy Hill. I'm Harper Leclerc, the assistant director." Harper was a budding poet with bright eyes and a thick journal tucked under one arm. She ushered Jessica inside, where the warmth of the fireplace erased the autumn chill. The foyer opened into a grand sitting room with ornate rugs, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and the scent of fresh apples and aged wood. "Celeste is in the garden," Harper said. "She insisted on greeting everyone personally." Jessica followed a stone path around the manor to find Celeste Merriweather under a wrought-iron arbor, wrapped in a grey shawl. Her hair was streaked with silver, but her posture still held the poise of a woman used to admiration. "Jessica," she said with a slow smile, "I'm honored you came." "The honor's mine," Jessica replied. "It's a beautiful place." "It's old," Celeste corrected gently, "and full of secrets." That evening, the guests gathered for dinner in the great dining hall. The group was small: Harper, a literary agent named Emma Gray, Trent Allard, Celeste's personal assistant, Professor Vance Ridley, a literary scholar, and Lionel Cray, a well-known critic with a reputation for tearing apart even beloved authors. Jessica noticed the tension between Lionel and nearly everyone else. During dinner, he belittled Harper's free verse, questioned Professor Ridley's credentials, and when Celeste read a short poem aloud, smirked audibly. "Did your husband write that one too?" he asked. A knife clinked against a plate. Silence fell. Celeste merely smiled. "Not even you can unmake my words, Lionel." Jessica caught Harper glancing nervously at Celeste. Something unspoken passed between them. After dessert, Jessica wandered to the library. She ran her fingers over the spines of old books, then paused at the window. The storm had arrived. Rain traced lines down the glass as lightning flashed in the distance. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was Harper. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. "I just wanted to be near the words." Jessica nodded. "You write, don't you?" "Mostly poems. Nothing good." Harper hesitated. "Lionel told me I'd never be published. He said my work was derivative." "He says a lot of things," Jessica replied. "Cruelty doesn't make someone insightful." Harper half smiled, then vanished into the hallway. By morning, the mood had shifted. Jessica descended the stairs to find Harper, pale and trembling, near the grand staircase. "He's dead," she said. Jessica followed her gaze. At the base of the marble steps, Lionel Cray's body lay sprawled at an unnatural angle, head twisted too far to one side. A crack in the railing above suggested he'd fallen, but something felt off. There were no scuff marks on the steps, no sign of a struggle. Jessica crouched near the body, careful not to touch anything. One of Lionel's hands was tightly closed. She gently pried it open and found a torn piece of fabric, delicate lace, tinged with a faint trace of perfume. She looked up the staircase, eyes narrowing. Trent appeared behind her. "The constable's on his way. Should we wake Celeste?" "She'll want to know. Jessica said, "and I'd like to speak with everyone." As Trent left, Jessica turned back to Lionel's body. The storm outside had broken branches, but inside, something far more dangerous had shattered. Someone's secret, someone's silence. And now, a man was dead. She stood slowly, her mind already organizing the pieces. The staircase was steep, yes, but Lionel hadn't simply slipped. His expression was frozen in shock, not pain. He hadn't expected to fall. Jessica Fletcher had solved enough murders to know the difference between accident and intent. Someone here had murdered Lionel Cray. And Ivy Hill Retreat, meant to be a sanctuary of words, had become a house of lies. Chapter 2. The Critic's final chapter. The constable from nearby Alder Glen arrived just before 8, a stout man with thick glasses and a perpetually furrowed brow. He introduced himself as Constable Ray Mooney, and after a cursory glance at the scene, he concluded, "Looks like a fall. Slick stairs, maybe some wine in him last night. Tragic, but not uncommon." Jessica stood beside him, arms folded. "I don't mean to step on your toes, Constable, but I don't think Lionel Cray simply tripped." He raised an eyebrow. "No?" "His body position isn't consistent with a stumble, and more importantly," she lowered her voice, "there's something clenched in his hand." Constable Mooney knelt beside the corpse and examined the fabric. "Lace?" he muttered, confused. "Where'd that come from?" "I'm not sure yet," Jessica said, "but I'd like to help you find out." Mooney sighed. "I've heard of you, Ms. Fletcher. Cabot Cove's most famous amateur detective." "All right, just don't get in the way." Jessica gave a polite smile. "Of course not." The guests had gathered again in the dining room, this time in silence. A tray of untouched breakfast sat cold on the sideboard. Celeste Merriweather, dressed in a dark navy shawl, stood at the head of the table, her face pale but composed. "I know this is difficult," she said. "Lionel was not an easy man, but no one deserves to die like that." "No one," muttered Professor Ridley from his seat near the window. "Even if he delighted in tearing people down." Jessica observed the room. Harper sat stiffly, eyes red from crying. Trent stood behind Celeste like a shadow, hands twitching at his sides. Emma Gray sipped tea with mechanical elegance. Everyone looked tired and scared. "I'd like to ask you all a few questions," Constable Mooney said. "Just routine. Where you were, what you saw, anything odd?" Jessica spoke up. "I think we should start with Harper. She was the one who found him." Harper looked startled, but nodded. "I came downstairs at around 6. I was going to take a walk before breakfast. The rain had stopped, but I saw him." I screamed. Mooney nodded. "Were you the first one up?" "I think so," Jessica added. "You told me last night Lionel said something cruel to you." Harper hesitated. "He told me I'd stolen my poems from Sylvia Plath. Then he accused Celeste of something horrible. I don't want to repeat it." Celeste's chin lifted. "Let's hear it." Harper looked away. "He said you didn't write your poetry, that it was all Graham's, your husband's, that you built a career on his words." Jessica watched Celeste's expression closely. It didn't waver. "He said it loudly, in front of Emma and Trent," Harper added. Emma lowered her cup. "He was intoxicated and cruel, but he said things like that to everyone." Mooney jotted down notes. "So far, nothing proves foul play." Jessica stepped forward. "Constable, I'd like to inspect Lionel's room, alone if I may." He hesitated. "As long as you don't move anything." Lionel's room was on the second floor, 2 doors from Jessica's. It smelled of cologne and old paper. A suitcase lay open on the bed, its contents haphazard. books, critiques, folders, some marked with red pen. On the writing desk, Jessica found a small portable typewriter. The ribbon was fresh. She scanned the pages. Lionel had been working on something. The myth of the Merryweathers, how a literary darling built her career on a lie. Her breath caught. One paragraph in particular stood out. Sources indicate several of Celeste Merryweather's earliest published poems match nearly line for line with unpublished material attributed to her late husband. Jessica slipped a notepad from her purse and jotted down a few lines. Then she returned to the hallway and nearly bumped into Trent. Sorry, he said, startled. Just checking on something. Mr. Allard, how long have you worked for Celeste? 6 years. I handle bookings, mail, typing, things like that. Did you ever type her poetry? Trent's eyes flickered. Number Y only file the printed copies. Jessica nodded. Did you know Lionel was writing an exposé? Trent hesitated. He mentioned it once, smugly, said he'd finally unmask a fraud. Did Celeste know? I don't think so. Jessica returned downstairs with a mind full of puzzles. Outside, the wind picked up again, and distant thunder rumbled. Inside, everyone had retreated to separate corners. She found Harper in the conservatory, flipping through a leather journal. May I? Jessica asked gently. Harper handed it to her. The poems were raw but genuine. Jessica recognized no signs of mimicry or plagiarism. You're very talented, she said. Harper gave a small, tearful smile. Thank you. I just wanted to be around writers who cared. Jessica looked out the rain-dappled glass. She now believed Lionel Cray had been murdered, and someone in Ivy Hill would do anything to keep their secrets buried. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Study. Constable. Mooney paced the foyer, scribbling distractedly in his notebook while rain tapped steadily against the windows. Jessica sat nearby, rereading her notes from Lionel's room. The revelation in his unfinished article was damning, if true. If Celeste Merryweather had published her husband's poetry under her own name, that secret could shatter her literary reputation. But motives alone didn't confirm murder. Jessica stood and crossed the hallway into the Manor's dim study. She needed to see Celeste's work for herself. The study smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, and 2 high-backed chairs flanked a cold fireplace. Jessica approached the writing desk. It was neatly arranged, pens, notepads, and a closed leather portfolio. Inside were a few hand-typed poems. She examined the pages closely. The font was uneven, with faintly misaligned letters. This wasn't from a computer or electric typewriter. These were typed using an old manual model, perhaps the one Jessica had seen earlier in Lionel's room. That puzzled her. Why would Lionel possess a machine matching the alignment of Celeste's drafts? She spotted a smaller drawer and gently tried the handle. Locked. A knock on the door frame interrupted her thoughts. Mind if I come in? Celeste stood there, wrapped in her shawl, a steaming mug in her hand. Of course not, Jessica said, stepping back from the desk. I find myself lost without writing, Celeste admitted. It used to be my refuge. These days, it feels like trespassing. Jessica gestured to the desk. These poems, are they recent? Celeste took a seat across from her. Some are rewrites. I've been revisiting Graham's old notebooks. They still speak to me. It's how I remember him. Jessica nodded. I understand grief, but Lionel claimed your earliest works were borrowed. Celeste's jaw tensed. He twisted everything. Graham and I collaborated for years. He was my greatest editor, but the words were mine. Jessica said nothing. She simply observed. Celeste leaned forward. "Are you investigating, Jessica?" Jessica replied evenly. "I'm searching for the truth, whatever that may be." Celeste rose. "Then search well. I've nothing to hide." After she left, Jessica returned to the locked drawer. A brass key glinted on a nearby shelf. Decorative, perhaps, but worth trying. She fit it into the lock. With a soft click, the drawer slid open. Inside were old press clippings, faded fan letters, and a smaller envelope labeled Graham Originals. Jessica opened it carefully. Inside were 5 typed poems, all familiar. They matched ones published under Celeste's name years ago, but each page bore a different typeface, clean, evenly spaced, and unmistakably typed on a different machine than Celeste's current work. She returned the envelope to the drawer and shut it gently. Down the hall, voices rose in argument. Jessica followed the sound to the sunroom. Emma Gray stood facing Professor Ridley, arms crossed tightly. "You told him, didn't you?" she snapped. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ridley replied coolly. "You fed Lionel that plagiarism story, hoping he'd publish it and destroy Celeste." Ridley scoffed. "Why would I do that?" "Because she rejected your manuscript 5 years ago. You've resented her ever since." Jessica stepped into the room. "Am I interrupting something?" They both turned. "No more than usual," Ridley said. "We were just debating theories." Emma glared at him, then turned to Jessica. "Lionel wasn't just a critic. He was a manipulator. He made enemies everywhere." Jessica asked, "Did he approach either of you with a threat recently?" Emma shook her head. "He offered me a chance to redeem my career by selling him inside information. I told him to go to hell." Ridley chuckled. "That sounds like Lionel." Jessica nodded slowly. "And what about you, Professor?" He shrugged. "He hinted at knowing secrets, but he always did. He once told me my degree was as fraudulent as a paperback romance. I learned to ignore him." Back in the study, Jessica typed one of the Graham Originals on a fresh page using the manual typewriter in Lionel's room. The alignment didn't match. The letters were crisper, cleaner, and the spacing more mechanical. That proved something important. Lionel hadn't typed those early drafts. Someone else had. Jessica returned to her own room and sat by the window. Outside, the storm deepened. The branches clawed at the glass like impatient fingers. Someone had killed Lionel to bury a truth, either a past deception or something even more dangerous. She stared at the typewritten notes she'd copied. Then she noticed something odd. One of the poems bore a faint fingerprint in the corner, smudged, oily. If analyzed, it might reveal something. She would need to get it to the constable. Jessica rose and headed for his office, but as she opened her door, she stopped. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway, faint, fleeting, but unmistakably human. And in its wake, the sound of a creaking door, closing quietly. Someone else was up, someone who had no business wandering. Jessica followed the sound. Chapter 4. Shadows and Manuscripts. Jessica moved silently down the carpeted hallway, careful not to let the creaking floorboards give her away. The faint glow of a storm lantern flickered near the stairs, but most of the house was cast in deep shadow. Somewhere ahead, a door had closed just seconds before. She reached the end of the corridor. There was a short flight of steps leading to the east wing, a less used section of the manor. Jessica followed them, eyes scanning the walls. She paused outside a heavy wooden door. It was slightly ajar. Beyond it, a study she hadn't seen before revealed itself. This room had a colder feel. Books were shelved in metal cases rather than wood, and the desk bore signs of recent activity. A half-empty teacup sat beside a leather satchel. Jessica leaned in. Footsteps sounded behind her. "Miss Fletcher," came a startled whisper. It was Trent. Jessica turned calmly. "Mr. Allard, couldn't sleep?" He looked embarrassed. "I saw you heading this way. Thought you might have heard something too." "I did," Jessica replied. "This door closed just before I got here." Trent stepped inside. "This is Emma's reading room. She asked for a private space when she arrived, said she needed quiet for manuscript reviews." Jessica walked slowly toward the desk. A printed document lay on top. She recognized the header immediately. The Myth of the Merryweathers, an inquiry into authorship. Lionel's article draft. Trent flinched. That wasn't there earlier. Jessica scanned the first few pages. This version had annotations, red underlines, margin comments, exclamation points. It had been edited thoroughly, and in the upper right corner, in small pencil marks, were initials. E.G. Emma must have taken Lionel's manuscript after he died, Jessica murmured. "Or before," Trent added darkly. Jessica raised an eyebrow. That's a dangerous suggestion." He sighed. "I just don't want Celeste to be blamed. She's already broken." Jessica tucked the manuscript under her arm. "Thank you, Mr. Allard. Please don't mention this room to anyone else. Not yet." She returned to her quarters, mind buzzing. Why would Emma be editing a dead man's exposé? Was it guilt, damage control, or something else entirely? The next morning, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind silver dew and a washed blue sky. The house was quieter than usual, each guest haunted by their own unease. Jessica joined Constable Mooney in the dining room. "Find something?" he asked. "I found a draft of Lionel's exposé," she replied. "It had been edited. The handwriting matches Emma Gray's." He frowned. "That woman's hiding something." "She's not the only one," Jessica said. "I'd like permission to inspect Lionel's suitcase again." Mooney led her upstairs. The case was still open on the bed where she'd left it. Jessica sifted through the inner pouch. Beneath a pile of papers, she discovered a sealed envelope addressed to herself. Her breath caught. She opened it. Inside was a single page typed in Lionel's brisk, cynical style. "Jessica, you may find this whole retreat amusing. I find it repulsive. Merryweather's poems are stolen and her fans are deluded. Trent knows more than he admits. Emma fears exposure. Even Ridley has his own bones in the closet. If I vanish, or if anything happens to me, don't assume it was an accident. L.C." Jessica read it twice. It wasn't proof, but it was confirmation. Lionel Cray feared for his life. She folded the letter and placed it into her pocket. Later that afternoon, she found Emma in the conservatory sipping tea while reading a leather-bound volume. "I need to ask about the manuscript," Jessica said, sitting across from her. Emma stiffened. "You were editing Lionel's article. Why?" Emma hesitated, then closed her book. "Because I wanted to soften the blow. He was going to humiliate Celeste. I tried to convince him to revise it. When I found his draft after the fall, I panicked." "You didn't give it to the constable," Jessica said. "I didn't want to be accused of stealing, or worse." Jessica watched her closely. "You edited it before he died, didn't you?" Emma flushed. "He let me read it that night. I begged him not to publish. He laughed in my face." "Where were you after dinner?" "In my room," she said too quickly. "Alone." Jessica stood. "Thank you." As she left the conservatory, she saw Harper near the stairs, clutching her notebook tightly. "Miss Fletcher?" the girl asked softly. Jessica turned. "Yes?" "I didn't tell the constable everything. I heard something that night, after midnight." Jessica stepped closer. "What did you hear?" "Someone arguing with Lionel," Harper whispered. I couldn't make out all the words. Just one thing he shouted. "You're a fraud, and you always were." Jessica felt the pieces begin to shift into place. It was no longer just about poetry. It was about lies. Lies that someone had killed to protect. Chapter 5. The Night of the Storm. The afternoon passed slowly at Ivy Hill Retreat. Despite the clearing weather, a thick fog of anxiety lingered inside the manor. Jessica spent the hours sorting through the puzzle in her notebook. Lionel's warnings, Celeste's evasiveness, Emma's guilty edits. And now, Harper's revelation of an argument overheard after midnight. Someone had confronted Lionel, someone had reason to silence him. Jessica found Constable Mooney in the parlour, going through a box of Lionel's personal effects. "I need to speak with all the guests again," she said. Mooney gestured to the room. "Have at it, they're all on edge already." They gathered in the drawing room by the tall windows, light streaming in weakly through lace curtains. Celeste sat closest to the fire, her shawl wrapped tight. Trent hovered behind her. Emma sat upright and pale, and Harper, notebook in hand, stood off to the side. Professor Ridley arrived last, smoothing his coat as though entering a lecture hall. Jessica stepped forward. "Last night, sometime after midnight, someone argued with Lionel Cray. He shouted that someone was a fraud. Harper heard it." Harper nodded, eyes downcast. Jessica turned to the group. Lionel had a draft of an exposé. He accused Celeste of passing off her husband's work as her own, but he also hinted others here had secrets. She met each gaze in turn. "I believe that secret was dangerous enough to get him killed." Emma stiffened. "Are you accusing someone?" Jessica replied calmly. "Not yet. But we must consider all possibilities." Ridley scoffed. "This is madness." "Is it?" Jessica asked. "You had your manuscript rejected by Celeste 10 years ago. You publicly questioned her legitimacy. I criticize, I don't kill." Jessica didn't flinch. "Emma, you edited Lionel's manuscript. You didn't turn it in after his death." Emma's voice trembled. "I panicked." "Then there's Trent. You type Celeste's letters, prepare her drafts. You knew what was being written and what wasn't." Trent's face flushed. "I never," Celeste interrupted softly. "Stop. All of you." Everyone turned to her. Celeste stood slowly. "Lionel was right. Some of those poems were Graham's. We co-wrote everything, but after he died, I used his work to keep publishing. I didn't know how to go on without him." There was silence. "I never meant to deceive anyone," she said. "But when the world kept calling me a genius, I let them." Jessica said gently. "Then Lionel threatened to expose the truth." Celeste nodded. "He demanded payment, said he'd ruin my legacy." Jessica watched her closely. "Did you confront him last night?" "No," Celeste said. "I was in my room. Trent can confirm it." Trent nodded. "She was there all night." Jessica folded her arms. Yet someone with a motive and lace on their clothing was in contact with Lionel before he died. Emma spoke again. "There's something else. Lionel told me he found a copy of Graham's original manuscript before Celeste's name was ever attached to it. He said Trent had it." All eyes turned. Trent's jaw dropped. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Jessica asked. "You had access to all Celeste's files. You could have found it and kept it." Trent trembled. "I didn't kill him. I swear." Jessica took a breath. "I believe you." He looked stunned. "You do?" "Yes, because someone else left behind a more compelling piece of evidence." She opened her notebook and held up a drawing, a sketch of Lionel's clenched hand. "When he died, he was holding a piece of torn lace. I matched it to a dressing gown found in the laundry this morning. It belonged to Emma Gray." Emma gasped. No, I burned that." "Exactly," Jessica said. "You tried to destroy it, but the torn sleeve remained, hidden in the laundry chute, a match to the lace in his hand." Mooney stood. "Ms. Gray, I'll need to speak with you in private." Emma's hands shook. "I didn't mean to. He provoked me. He said he'd destroy me. that I was nothing but a failed agent clinging to past glory. Jessica's voice was calm. "So, you met him on the landing?" "I just wanted to scare him," she whispered. But he laughed. He said I was invisible. I pushed him." "Then you left him there and burned the evidence?" Emma nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. Mooney stepped forward. "Emma Gray, you're under arrest for the murder of Lionel Cray." As she was led from the room, the remaining guests sat in silence. Jessica closed her notebook. Another chapter was ending, but not without consequences. Chapter 6, The Guilt That Remains. The storm had passed, but the heaviness in the air lingered. Emma Gray had been taken into custody, leaving a silence that felt less like peace and more like grief. Despite her confession, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that not everything was as settled as it appeared. She sat in the garden courtyard later that afternoon, sipping lukewarm tea from a delicate porcelain cup. The late sun scattered gold over the ivy-covered walls. Harper sat opposite her, legs curled under her on the stone bench, eyes distant. "She didn't seem like a murderer," Harper said at last. Jessica nodded. "Murder often isn't committed by monsters. Sometimes it's desperation or fear." Harper bit her lip. "I believed her. About Lionel, he was cruel, but still. She didn't seem like she wanted to kill him." Jessica said nothing, watching the breeze stir a vine. Something about Emma's confession still bothered her. The timeline felt incomplete. She stood and excused herself, returning to her room. There, she opened her notebook and reread her notes. Emma claimed to have pushed Lionel on the landing, claimed he'd laughed, mocked her, and she retaliated in anger. But Lionel was found at the base of the stairs on the opposite side of the house. The main staircase was wide, well lit. The landing she mentioned would have meant he fell in view of at least 2 guest rooms. And yet no one had heard a thing. Jessica moved through the halls, retracing the path. At the top of the main staircase, she studied the banister and peered over the edge. No sign of damage, no scuffs, no disturbed carpet. But on the east wing staircase, older, narrower, and less visible, she found something she had missed before, a faint dent in the wood railing. She knelt. There, caught beneath the edge of a post, was a button. Brass, engraved with a swan. Elegant and feminine. Jessica stood slowly. Back in her room, she examined a photo from the first night, taken during dinner. Everyone had been seated around the long table. Celeste, in her shawl and navy dress, wore a blouse fastened with matching brass buttons, and now one was missing. Jessica knocked gently on Celeste Merriweather's door. It opened, slowly. Celeste stood on the threshold, visibly older than she had seemed just days ago. "I thought things were over," she said. "Isn't Emma guilty?" Jessica hesitated. She may have pushed Lionel, but someone else finished the job. Celeste's face paled. Jessica stepped inside and gently closed the door. He may have fallen during the confrontation with Emma, but he wasn't dead then. The impact wasn't enough. There were signs he was moved after the fall, dragged, finished off. Celeste lowered herself into a velvet armchair. Jessica sat across from her. "One of your buttons was found on the east staircase. The narrow one. It didn't fall by accident." Celeste didn't respond. Her hands trembled slightly. "Why did you go to him?" Jessica asked gently. "What did he say?" Celeste finally looked up. Her voice was soft. "He came to my door after midnight, waved the draft in my face, said he'd publish it, said he'd expose every lie. He called me a fraud, a thief." Jessica waited. "I begged him," Celeste whispered, "begged him to leave me alone, but he laughed. I followed him when he walked away. He stumbled on the stairs. Emma must have pushed him earlier. Maybe he'd been drinking. But he wasn't dead. He looked up at me. She pressed a hand to her chest, and I thought, this is it. If I walk away now, it ends. Jessica's voice was low. So you made sure he didn't get up again? I didn't push him. I only... She closed her eyes. I finished what had started. Jessica let the silence settle. I loved Graham, Celeste said. He was a brilliant man, but I was the one with the voice. I shaped the verses. I gave them breath. After he died, the world wanted more, so I kept writing, but they only listened because they thought it was him. Jessica nodded. The truth always rises, Celeste, but the past doesn't have to define the future. Celeste looked toward the window, the sun sinking behind bare trees. What happens now? That's for the law to decide, Jessica said, rising. But I'll speak to the constable. She left the room quietly and walked back into the hall, pausing once to glance back. Celeste Merriweather sat with her face in shadow, framed by a house she no longer owned, not truly, and by memories she could no longer silence. Chapter 7. The Cost of Silence. Constable Mooney leaned against the stone balustrade of the rear veranda, nursing a mug of bitter coffee as Jessica approached. Below, the garden looked peaceful again, but the retreat had become anything but tranquil. Jessica handed him the brass button she'd found. From Celeste's blouse, found near the east staircase, the same stairway where Lionel was moved after the fall. Mooney examined the button in his palm, then looked up. You're saying she finished him off? Jessica nodded. Emma pushed him, but the fall didn't kill him. Celeste came afterward, saw an opportunity to silence him for good. Mooney sighed. Damn shame. I liked her poems. She was trapped in the legacy she built, Jessica said. The truth threatened to take everything from her. Mooney pocketed the button. We'll bring her in, quietly. She's already confessed, informally, Jessica added. I'd like to speak to her again before you take her. Mooney nodded once. 5 minutes. Jessica returned to Celeste's study. The poet sat at her writing desk, staring at a blank sheet of paper. The same Remington typewriter waited silently beside her. You were right, Celeste said as Jessica entered. It never belonged to me. Jessica sat across from her. You made it your own in time, but deception leaves a heavy shadow. Celeste gave a bitter laugh. You think I don't know that? I've been looking over my shoulder for 20 years. You could have told the truth when Lionel confronted you. I was going to, Celeste said. I even wrote a letter, but when I saw him there, groaning, trying to stand, something snapped. I thought, if I don't stop him now, he'll take everything. She turned the typewriter toward Jessica and inserted a single page. I finally wrote something new, Celeste said. Jessica read the typed confession in silence. It was brief, elegant, and honest. He would have made it cruel, Celeste added, turned it into spectacle. I wanted it to be mine. Words are powerful, Jessica said gently. But so is responsibility. Celeste looked out the window. I suppose I always knew it would come to this. Jessica touched her shoulder lightly. You're still a writer, Celeste. Even if this ends your career, it doesn't erase the life you lived, or what you created, truthfully or not. A knock came at the door. Constable Mooney stood there, hat in hand. Celeste rose slowly. No handcuffs, she murmured. Mooney nodded. Of course. As they left the room, Jessica stayed behind. Her eyes drifted to the old desk drawer. She opened it one final time. Among the clippings and fan letters sat a faded photograph. Celeste and Graham on the front steps of Ivy Hill, both laughing, a dog curled at their feet. Neither looked like a literary genius, just two people in love with each other and maybe with the idea of being remembered. Jessica closed the drawer gently. That evening, the retreat guests gathered quietly for dinner, their number now smaller. No one spoke of Emma or Celeste. The conversation stuck to weather, to books, to travel plans. Harper sat beside Jessica and picked at her salad. "I don't think I can write here anymore." Jessica smiled gently. "Sometimes a place's story becomes part of your own. That doesn't mean you have to erase it. Just write through it." Harper looked thoughtful. "Is that how you do it?" "I write to understand what I've seen," Jessica said, "to make peace with it, even the terrible parts." After dinner, Harper handed Jessica a folded page. "I started something new." Jessica unfolded it, a poem, sparse, honest, and raw. No false polish, no imitation. "It's beautiful," Jessica said. "Keep going." Harper smiled, her eyes no longer heavy with fear. Later that night, Jessica walked the halls of Ivy Hill one last time. The rain had stopped, the windows reflected moonlight, and for the first time since her arrival, the silence felt earned. She returned to her room and began packing. In her suitcase beside her notes, she placed Celeste's confession. The constable would add it to the report, but Jessica kept a copy, for the record, for history, for truth. She sat down at her own travel typewriter. The keys felt lighter beneath her fingers now. Title, Murder at Ivy Hill Retreat. She paused, then typed. It began with words. It ended with silence, and somewhere in between a life was taken, and another redeemed. She smiled faintly. Tomorrow, she would leave Ivy Hill, but the story, like all true stories, would stay with her forever. Chapter 8. The Last Page. The next morning dawned bright and unusually warm for autumn. Mist curled across the grass at Ivy Hill, fading as the sun crept over the rooftops. Birdsong replaced thunder. The manor, still majestic but quieter now, stood as a monument to stories, written, stolen, and silenced. Jessica Fletcher finished her tea on the balcony just outside her room. Her bag was packed, the manuscript outlined, and her ticket home confirmed, but she hadn't yet said goodbye to the retreat's youngest voice. She found Harper in the front garden, sketching a path of stones beneath a small maple tree. "You've got a good eye," Jessica said. Harper looked up and smiled. "I didn't know how to start a new poem, so I started drawing instead." "Sometimes the story finds you, even when you stop searching," Jessica replied. Harper stood. "I wanted to thank you. Not just for solving everything, but for believing in me. In all of us." "You did the hardest part," Jessica said. "You told the truth, even when it frightened you." Harper shifted her gaze to the manor. "Will she go to prison?" Jessica considered. "That's for the courts to decide," but she confessed. "That counts for something." They walked together toward the foyer, where staff were beginning to clean and prepare for the next round of guests. It seemed, would go on, even if Ivy Hill itself had changed forever. Inside, Jessica was greeted by Professor Ridley, now uncharacteristically soft-spoken. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I was too proud to admit how badly I wanted Celeste's approval." "Most of us are looking for something," Jessica replied. "Validation, legacy, peace. The trouble starts when we pretend we already have it." He nodded slowly. "Do you think anyone will still read her poetry?" "They already are," Jessica said. "The question is whether they'll understand it differently now." He gave a melancholy smile and disappeared into the library. Jessica collected her coat and walked outside, where Constable Mooney waited near the gate. His cruiser idled quietly at the curb. "We'll take Celeste to the county courthouse later today," he said. "She's calm, almost relieved." She's carried that burden for years, Jessica replied. It was never just about the poems. Mooney pulled out a folder and handed it to her. For your notes, the official report, and a copy of Emma's final statement. Jessica tucked the folder into her bag. Funny thing, Mooney added, people always think murder is loud, screaming, rage, chaos, but it's usually quiet. A decision made in silence, then silence afterward. Jessica nodded. That's why it echoes. He tipped his hat. Safe travels, Miss Fletcher. The train ride home was slow and rhythmic. Jessica sat in the corner of the passenger car, sunlight flickering through the window. Her typewriter case rested beneath her seat, and the first few pages of her new book sat in her lap. She reread her own words. Ivy Hill was a place of stories, of poems, of shadows, stitched between lines. But it was silence, what wasn't said, what couldn't be said, that killed Lionel Cray. In chasing the truth, he tore back the curtain and paid the price. Two women stood at the edge of that truth, one who tried to bury it and one who had been buried by it. She flipped to the next page and continued typing, her fingers steady. For a woman who'd seen many kinds of darkness, Jessica Fletcher still believed in the light of truth. She thought of Celeste, now facing consequences not only for a final act of violence, but for years of living behind a borrowed name. Of Emma, whose desperation cracked her pride, of Harper, whose talent had survived the storm, and of Graham Merriweather, whose words had outlived them all. Outside, the landscape blurred into trees and hills. The train curved toward the coast. Home wasn't far. Jessica paused only once more, then typed, "Justice, like poetry, begins with a single line. But it's how the lines are arranged, the meaning behind the silence, that tells the true story." She smiled softly, set the pages aside, and closed her eyes as the train pressed forward.